Yo, hello everybody. Kappy here. It is time for another Strategy 101 lecture. Uh Today we are going to take your idea and make it reality. Well, at least the first part. This is a two-part lecture. We'll go over it in a little bit. But these are the steps to bring your strategies to life. So let's begin. So last lecture we went over the basics of strategy in Thousand Year Door. If you're interested in that lecture, the link will be in the description. Now that you know a bit about the basics of strategy, it's time to take those concepts and dive a little deeper into them. So we're going to be taking a look at all five elements and creating a strategy together. And at some point, we'll also be looking at some strategies from the strategy contest as a reference. But for today, we're going to start on making our own together. Now, like I said, this is part one, so we're only going to be covering a few elements today. And they will be core strategies, intent, and creativity. So, which boss should we choose? There are so many bosses in Thousand Year Door. All of them have unique attacks and phases. Some are more scripted, others are basically pure RNG. But I want to keep things simple, so I've decided that for the strategy that we're going to make together, we're going to use Cortez. Cortez is a boss that you fight in Chapter 5. He has easy to plan with attacks and patterns, which is really good for players looking to dip their toes into strategy. So let's go over the steps to fully completing a strategy and the basics that they usually employ. And I want to make a note here as you're looking at these steps. These are the steps that I personally take when I'm strategizing. As I've said before, different players may take different approaches. I'm sure there are many who don't use anything like this. But these are the steps that I take when I'm strategizing. And if you're curious, the steps in bold are what we are going to be going over more in depth this lecture. So step one is know your opponent. Basically, you got to know who you're fighting. This step is very important, but also as you start strategizing and as you play the game more, this step kind of becomes less and less time consuming. It just kind of happens, but I mean, it's an important strategy, an important step because if you've seen my streams, there are times where I'm like, wait, the boss didn't do this thing, or it did this much damage, or something, like, so you got to know what your opponent does, so that you know what's going to happen. So it is really important. Step two is the idea. This is it. This is the big part. This is where you think of what you're going to do for a boss. So this is a huge chunk. Not as huge a chunk as you'd think. I'd say the meat of strategizing is step 3, 4, and 5, and X, which is, however, we'll get there. But basically, the idea is like you need to get started somewhere, so it's a huge part of it. You need something. And then step 3 is the first draft. So after I have an idea for a boss, I create a quick first draft. So I'll just write down something, just get something on paper, and then later on, I start to look at it and make it a little better. But getting that first draft down is really important. So we're going to focus on creating our idea, and we're going to focus on making our first draft tonight. So let's just jump right in. Step 1, you need to know your opponent. So I suggest you write down the boss's stats and make sure you know their HP triggers and attack patterns. Even after years of strategizing, you can forget little things like this, and it can completely throw a strategy off. So for this exercise, we're going to be writing down everything. Usually when I'm doing a strategy, I'll write down the boss's HP, attack, and defense. Sometimes I write down a few extra things if they're relevant, like HP triggers or other attacks that have different damage. But for this exercise, we're going to write down literally everything so that we know everything we possibly can about the boss. And the reason why I only write down a little bit is a lot of the information that we'll be writing down today can be irrelevant to a strategy. But a lot of the times it's irrelevant because you aim to make it that way. So if some bosses have certain attacks and they never use them, you don't need to know about them because your strategy makes it irrelevant. But it's still a good idea to know everything about a boss so that you know whether or not you have to account for something. So, what do we know about Cortez? Let's start with the basics. Cortez has 20 HP, 4 attack, and 1 defense. He has 3 phases. Phases 2 and 3 are triggered by losing all HP. So, Cortez effectively has 60 HP. You get him down to 0 once, he goes to phase 2. You get him down to 0 again, he goes to phase 3. You get him down to 0 that last time, he's finally KO'd. And something really important to note is that the phase transition skips Cortez's turn. And actually, it doesn't even just skip Cortez's turn. This is a little outside of like the boss, but just as an extra little note, it also skips any turn, any part of your turn. So if Mario KOs Cortez's first phase, and let's just say Bobbery hasn't gone yet, it skips Bobbery's turn as well. And you start with Mario and Bobbery being able to move again. It effectively, like, basically ends your turn and it skips Cortez's turn, and then a new turn starts in the phase transition. There's a little more to it. It's a little more complicated, but for now, for the purposes of this, for the purposes of what we know about Cortez and like the simplicity of the strategy, since we're trying to cater to more beginner level, it skips Cortez's turn. So let's look at phase 1, the AI. So phase 1, Cortez is he attacks the front, then he attacks the back, then he attacks the front or back 4 times, and each hit is 2 attack. And then he loops back. So he does front, back, either front or back 4 times, front, back, either front or back 4 times, and he just keeps looping forever. Phase 2 has a unique property. Cortez's height can be lowered 1 stage by hitting the bone pile on the ground. So Cortez has 2 places you can hit him. You can hit his head, or you can hit the bone pile. If you do this twice, his rib cage opens up and there's a gem that's protected by the rib cage that becomes exposed. You deal 1 extra damage to this gem. After a turn of the bone pile not being attacked, Cortez goes back up to full height. And after 2 Cortez turns of the gem being exposed, his ribcage will close, and you can't attack the gem anymore. I will be honest, this right here is something that a lot of strategists, I would say a lot of strategies that I see, they do not see this behavior. Most of the time, you'll open the gem, and then you do so much damage already, even without like a lot of badges, that you'll probably KO him pretty quickly once the gem is exposed. I mean, he only has 20 HP. Remember that. So it's like, you don't see a lot of this extra behavior, but it's important to know it because if you wanted to do a looping strategy, this behavior right here is important to know. Right? If Cortez is not lowered, if he's at full height, he attacks the front or the back. If he's lowered, Cortez charges up for +4, and then he unleashes an attack that hits both Mario and partner for 8 attack. So he basically gives himself +4 attack and then he hits Mario and partner with a move that deals 8 damage, and then that charge goes away. So he has to recharge up if he wants to use it again. Phase 3. Cortez now has his weapons that he used in Phase 1 floating alongside his head. If he is at 10 or less HP on his turn, Cortez will consume half of the audience's souls and fully heal. And this can only happen once. Now, it says that I think when he actually heals, it says he heals like 40 ish. It's not like an exact. He heals way above 20 HP. I'll just say that. But he only heals basically up to full. So because he still only has a max of 20. All of Cortez's weapons have 4 HP and 0 defense. And then they have slightly different attacks. We'll go over them. The sword is spiky. The rest are not. The weapons can move between aerial and hovering. They're hammerable, basically, at the end of their turn. If defeated, the weapons drop to the ground and are revived after 1 turn. Now, what's really important is that if Flurry uses Gale Force and succeeds on any of the weapons, they are gone from the battle permanently. They cannot come back. So if you needed to get rid of the weapons for whatever reason, Gale Force gets rid of them all. Let's talk about the attack order of the weapons. So the first attack is the sword. It does 2 hits to the front or back, 2 attack for each hit. Then the scimitar goes. It's 1 hit for 3 attack to the front or back. Then the hook. It's 1 hit for 2 attack that can inflict poison to the front or back. Then the rapier. It hits Mario and partner for 2 attack that pierces defense. That means, if you're unaware, that means that damage dodge and defense plus do not work. Only P down, D up will reduce that damage besides guarding. And then last stand. Thank you. Someone in chat said last stand. Yes, last stand also reduces that. And then finally, Cortez's head goes. It's 1 hit for 4 attack to front or back. It's a lot of attacks. So, and it always goes in this order. So if a weapon is down, they just get skipped in the attack, but it'll still go in the order that you see. So you don't need to worry about like, oh, is the rapier going to go first? Is the hook going to go second? No. It's always sword, scimitar, hook, rapier, and then the head. Let's talk about the bone pile. Cortez, this bone pile is only targetable in phases 1 and 2. It's actually gone in phase 3. It's just his head. It's top and front spiky. So I have these little definitions down here. We'll get into them in a second. 2 of Cortez's weapons are top spiky, the sword and the scimitar. I forgot to mention that in the last slide, but I did mention it here that the scimitar is also spiky, and the rapier is front spiky, and it also prevents bomb from being used. So if it's in a hammerable position and you try to use bomb, you can't use bomb. So top spiky means that you cannot jump, head bonk, body slam, or ground pound, etc. That particular enemy. And front spiky means that you can't hammer, love slap, gulp, shade fist, etc. And what's important to note is that bomb can sometimes bypass front spiky, but sometimes it can't. It's weird. Sometimes it can bypass it, and sometimes an enemy's like particular spikiness, like the rapier, for front spiky enemies, stops bomb. So now that's everything that we know about Cortez. And that's a lot of info. if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to go back through these slides and write down all of this if you wanted to, or write down what you feel is important, just for future reference. But now that we know everything we need to know, it's time to come up with an idea for a strategy. But how do you start? How do you start creating an idea for a strategy? There's so many things you can do in this game. So how do you even get started? My recommendation is choose what I call a cornerstone of the strategy. This can be something like, I want to use Yoshi Mini Egg in Peril, to I want to achieve Mario plus partner peril on the same turn with this specific move. So it can be pretty general or it can be pretty specific. And generally, you'll pick what core strategy this is here as well. And the core strategy, like I mentioned before, most of them are just attack or damage core strategies. They're usually not loops or combined or both. So that's usually not as important, but it is something to think about as you do it, as you choose that cornerstone. And don't fret over what you pick for the cornerstone. And what I mean by that is, once you pick a cornerstone, don't start thinking, oh, could I choose a better cornerstone or something like that? Or could I make this cornerstone more optimal? Don't try to optimize yet. It'll make things tougher down the road. Just pick something that you'd like to do in your strategy and roll with it. We will worry about changes later. Now, for this exercise, let's use a cornerstone that I've thought up. Since we're doing this together, I figured I would pick some things for educational purposes. So for this exercise, we are going to use this cornerstone for Cortez. And it's going to be both Mario and partner in peril in phase 1. And because we're doing Mario and partner in peril, it's basically probably going to be a damage core strategy for now. So that's what we're going to go with. Now, working on your cornerstone. Let's get this out of the way first. Your cornerstone and your overall idea can change during this process. You may add extra cornerstones, you may add conditions or restrictions. And like I said before, cornerstones are a singular part of the overall idea, especially if it's achieved early in the fight. So, for example, just in our example right now, we have a cornerstone that's going to happen in phase 1 of Cortez. So what's happening in phase 2 and 3? Well, we'll get there, but just showing you that cornerstones are just a single part of your overall idea of your strategy. But what I think is important is that you try to work with that initial cornerstone for your first draft, and then you think about changes. Now, sometimes as you're working on your initial cornerstone, it could change, and that's okay. But what I think when you're just starting out, I think it's really important that you try to work with your initial cornerstone for your first draft to see where it goes, and then you think about changes. So when I work on a strategy, I like to write out things like my beginning stats, the badges I'm equipping, the items I'm using, etc., that go with the cornerstone. Now, these usually change as I work on the strategy in the first draft phase. So, right now, let's write out everything that we know. We'll tackle it one element at a time. First, Mario stats. I always start with 10 HP and 5 FP. This can increase later if needed. And the reason why you can increase it is because there's HP plus and FP plus badges that you can equip. And if you need to, you can also just level up Mario's stats normally. But badges are really important to a strategy. The more BP you have, the more options you have generally. So I always start with 10 HP and 5 FP. Those are the base stats. So when you start the game, Mario starts with 10 HP and 5 FP. So I always start with that. Now, badges. We know that we're going to be utilizing peril for both Mario and partner. So let's put down that we'll have Mega Rush and Mega Rush P equipped already, because there's no reason to use peril without those badges equipped, for the most part. Now let's look at items. Unless I know I'm using a specific item like right away, I'll I'll write it down. But normally, I figure out my items as I'm like figuring out my first draft. So for now, we're gonna leave it empty. And finally, which partner are we gonna use? It's an important decision. Right now we've got pretty low FP, so if we're gonna use Peril, Yoshi seems like a decent choice because Ground Pound costs no FP compared to Goombella's 3 FP multi bomb. We'll start with him, and he'll be at super rank, so that he can Ground Pound 5 times and has access to Mini Egg if we want to use Mini Egg in Peril. All right, let's do a quick review. So, our boss, Cortez. Um, Here's the cornerstone. Both Mario and partner in peril in phase 1, and it is a damage core strategy. We're starting with 10 HP and 5 FP. Right now, the only badges we have equipped are Mega Rush and Mega Rush P. We're not using any items just yet, and we're using Yoshi as our starting partner. And with this, we have an idea of what we want to do. We'll get Mario and his partner into Peril Phase 1, and then destroy Cortez with that. Now, we need to actually make the strategy and bring it to life. In this lecture, we're only going to be working on the first draft again. We will not be doing any optimizing whatsoever. We're going to review the strategy that we make in this lecture and optimize it and go over it in the next lecture. So let's get started on our first draft. We are finally ready to create a first draft of our strategy. We have an idea to work with, but before we begin, I want to go over a couple things that are really important in this step in the strategic process. The first draft is taking your idea and giving it life in a strategy without thinking too much about the details. We know we want to get Mario and partner in peril in phase 1, but how exactly will we do that? Well, for a first draft, don't sweat the details. Just write down what comes to you. What's important is that you start writing out how the turns will go and then worry about the details later. You don't want to get stuck with an unfinished strategy that you can't figure out how to finish. Just write something and go with it, because once you see everything, it'll be much easier. And I'm going to say it again because it's important. Do not optimize in this step. You can optimize as you write your first draft. It can be done, and experienced strategists will do it. I do it, actually. But if you're just starting out, I cannot stress enough that it is not good to optimize on the first draft, because without the experience of strategizing a lot, it can easily lead to tunnel vision and forcing elegance and creativity in a strategy when starting out. And also, it is okay if not every move has intent at this point. We just need to get something on paper that wins and uses our cornerstone. So let's get started. I'll be putting our current stats, badges, and items in every slide as a quick reference point for you. It'll be in the top right-hand corner. So as you can see, just showing you, top right-hand corner, you can see the stats. Okay, so we're going to start where every strategy starts, turn 1. We know that Cortez has predictable attacks in phase 1, so let's start there. They'll attack the front turn 1 and the back turn 2, then a random target 4 times, as a quick review. So, turn 1, let's get Mario into peril. Mario has 10 HP and 5 FP, and Cortez only deals 4 damage. With a point swap, our HP would become 5, putting Mario at the perfect HP value to get into peril from an attack. Let's do that. we'll jump on Cortez to deal some damage and have our partner use the point swap. Turn 2, we can do the exact same thing for our partner to get them into peril. Let's jump again with Mario and point swap with Yoshi. So, at a glance, this is what it'll look like. We jump and then point swap Mario. Cortez has 18 HP. Mario is in peril. Yoshi's still at full health. We have 5 FP, and I always like to write down whether or not you're gonna guard a move, just so you know. So in this case, you don't guard because you don't want to reduce the 4 damage to 3, because then Mario would only have 2 HP. So you don't want to guard it. You just want to take the attack. And then turn 2, it's literally the same thing, except instead of point swapping Mario, we point swap Yoshi. Mario now has Mega Rush active, so we deal massive damage. So Cortez now has 6 HP, and now both Mario and Yoshi are in peril with 5 FP. And again, do not guard the attack so that Yoshi gets into peril. Now, we have to use 2 point swaps. So if you see in the top right, I now have 2 point swaps added. So now we're going to finish off Cortez's first phase, turn 3, with a jump. Phase 2 then starts, and we can already see that we have enough damage to KO him with a jump, which is 12 damage, plus a ground pound, which is 15 damage. Now, I'm going to mention this now, just as something to turn back to, maybe as you have a little more experience, but at this very moment, I would start changing things, personally. If I were writing down this strategy, I would start changing things right now. And it's because I have a lot of experience in strategy, and it's pretty clear that we have way too much damage that's not being used properly. Like, we're dealing 27 damage with a jump and ground pound already off the bat. But for the purpose of this exercise together, let's follow through with the simple approach and just finish our first draft. Because it's very important that you finish without optimizing. So at a glance, you can see the turns that we're now adding in bold. Turn 3, we jump. Phase 1 ends. Everything gets skipped, as I mentioned. So Cortez now has 20 HP again. Mario and Yoshi are still in peril. We have 5 FP. No attack from Cortez because it gets skipped. Turn 4, we jump, ground pound, and phase 2 is over. The same thing happens, basically. Cortez now, again, has 20 HP. Mario and Yoshi are still in peril. 5 FP. And phase 3, like phase 2, can be finished with jump plus ground pound, and Cortez is down. We've won. So let's take a look. We just added 1 turn. Jump, ground pound, turn 5, and it's KO. I like to write KO to signify that that's it. The fight is over. So let's review our first draft. Here it is, completed. We got turn 1, jump, point swap Mario to put Mario into peril. You don't guard the attack. Cortez attacks Mario, who's in front. Turn 2, you jump, point swap Yoshi, who's in the back. Cortez attacks the back, which puts Yoshi into peril without a guard. And then turns 3, 4, and 5, we just KO Cortez with a jump and ground pound. There's nothing he can do about it because we're already in peril, and that's it. It's a very basic strategy. It's not creative, but it gets the job done quickly and efficiently, and there's clear intent in what's happening as far as the peril setup goes. As far as our cornerstone goes, there is intent. We know what we're doing those first 2 turns. Now, not every turn, actually most actions here don't have too much intent as far as like the creative way to do things. Like the jump is only doing so much with Mario, but you have to deal damage at some point. So, and there's intent in destroying Cortez with double peril, but I said that I'd have changed this as I wrote it. But again, I want to emphasize that just getting to this point is huge if you're starting out. Just getting something written down that works, that goes from beginning a fight to end a fight, is huge. We can now see a full strategy and begin the optimization process and begin putting some flair to our first draft. So what are the next steps? Right now, If I'm being honest, I'd give the strategy a 4 if someone submitted this for the strategy contest. It's way too basic, and it leaves a lot to be desired as far as optimality and elegance goes. And that's okay. I want to say it again. That is okay. First drafts usually aren't going to be great when you're starting out as a strategist. It's important to be able to see the whole fight, though, to look at areas to improve. So, for next time, we're going to look over the whole strategy and see where we can make immediate improvements, keeping our cornerstone in mind. Can we tighten up our peril setup? Does it need to be in phase 1? Do we need both Mario and partner in peril? All these are questions we are going to try to answer next time when we optimize and review our strategy. So I have a question for you watching. How would you make improvements? Take a look back at the first draft. Just scroll back through to the video. I'll definitely have timestamps for it too. Take a look back at the first draft and the cornerstone we're using. What would you do to make improvements? Jot them down if you'd like and compare them to the improvements that I will be making in our next lecture. And don't worry about being right or wrong, because there's really not a right or wrong way to go about it. What I really want you to get out of this little exercise, if you choose to participate, is to get yourself in the Paper Mario strategy headspace. And stay tuned for part 2. Next week. Why did I say next week? It's not going to be next week, fam. I don't know why next week. I must have just put it there as I was writing. When the next lecture comes out, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later, we will turn this 4 strategy into one worthy of a 7 or higher even. Please consider subscribing to me on YouTube, like the video, and leave a comment to help grow my audience. I upload a lot of tutorial content for this game to help aspiring challenge runners and veterans alike. And subscribing goes a long way to getting my stuff out to more people. Do you have a question about what I covered today? Leave a comment, and I will do my best to answer it. Thank you again for watching this lecture. Again, part 2, we will be going over everything that we just created in part 1, so I really hope you look forward to it. Thank you.